The morning sun had only begun to climb above the horizon, stretching thin fingers of gold across the manicured lawns of Greenfield Memorial Cemetery. The world was waking up, but here the air carried a hush, as if the living dared not intrude too loudly among the stones of the departed. Wesley Reynolds stood motionless before an elegant slab of white marble, the name carved deep into its face, Elizabeth Reynolds, beloved wife, was all that remained of the woman who had once filled his life with warmth and meaning. 5 years had passed since the illness had stolen her away, yet the wound inside him remained raw, unhealed. His hand trembled slightly as he laid a bouquet of fresh white lilies at the base of the headstone. Her favorite flowers. "I miss you, Liz," he whispered, his voice nearly swallowed by the morning stillness. His salt-tan pepper hair caught the light, his tailored suit crisp, the picture of a man at the pinnacle of success. Yet beneath the immaculate exterior, there lingered a hollow ache. Horizon Technologies had grown into a giant under his command, the stock soaring, his name appearing regularly in headlines. He had a penthouse overlooking the city's skyline, a garage lined with cars most men only dreamed of, and a fortune that seemed endless. But when night came and the crowds disappeared, he returned to silence, to empty rooms, to a life that looked whole from the outside yet was gutted at its core. This place, this grave, was the only corner of the world where he let the mask slip. Here he could be a grieving husband rather than a powerful CEO. Here, and only here, did he allow the loneliness to show. But today something felt different. He wasn't alone. At first it was no more than a faint murmur carried on the breeze, words so soft he thought them imagined. He turned, scanning the quiet rows of graves, and then he saw her, a tiny figure kneeling only a short distance away, her knees pressed to the earth before another headstone. She couldn't have been more than 6. The faded blue of her dress clung to her thin frame, and her dark hair was pulled into a messy ponytail that swayed as she bent over a small bundle of wilted wildflowers. Her voice rose again, fragile but clear in the silence. "Mommy, I'm hungry again today," she whispered, her hands clutching the petals as though they were treasure. "Ethan didn't eat yesterday. Can you send us some food, please? I tried to find work, like you showed me, but they said I'm too little." Wesley froze. The word struck him like a blade, lodging in the deepest part of him. Hunger, desperation. From the mouth of a child kneeling before a grave, he could see her small shoulders trembling, her back hunched as if the weight of the entire world rested on her fragile spine. For a moment he could not move, could not even breathe. Drawn by something he didn't understand, Wesley stepped forward. The gravel crunched softly beneath his polished shoes, and the sound made the girl stiffen. She spun around, eyes wide with alarm. Those eyes, enormous, shimmering with both fear and defiance, rooted him to the spot. He raised both hands slightly, palms outward, the way one might soothe a startled animal. "Hello there," he said gently, his voice stripped of its usual authority. "I didn't mean to frighten you." She scrambled to her feet, her small fists balled as though she might fight or flee. Wesley took a careful step closer, gesturing toward Elizabeth's stone. "That's my wife's grave," he said softly. "Elizabeth Reynolds. I was just visiting her." The girl blinked, confusion shadowing her wary expression. She glanced between him and the marble headstone, her lips pressing into a tight line. "Your wife?" she asked, the words trembling. "Yes," he answered. "Elizabeth. She was my wife." For an instant the world tilted. Up close, he could see her face clearly, the delicate arch of her eyebrows, the determined set of her little jaw, the exact shade of her eyes. It was as though Elizabeth's childhood photographs had come to life and were standing before him now. His heart lurched violently in his chest. It was impossible, yet undeniable. He was staring into the eyes of a stranger's child, and at the same time, into the ghost of the woman he had loved. His mouth had gone dry, his voice a rasp as he asked, "What's your name?" The girl lifted her chin with a dignity that seemed far older than her 6 fragile years. "Harper," she said. Wesley swallowed hard, his thoughts spinning. Harper. And those eyes, Elizabeth's eyes. In that moment, the stillness of the cemetery broke inside him, replaced with a storm he had no idea how to weather. The silence between them stretched, heavy with questions Wesley couldn't yet form, and Harper refused to answer. He saw her glance toward the trees that bordered the cemetery, her gaze flicking nervously as if someone or something waited there. Her small fingers twisted around the hem of her faded dress. And then her stomach betrayed her with a loud growl that cut through the morning air. She froze, embarrassed, her cheeks darkening. Wesley's chest tightened at the sound. He had sat at dinners worth more than most people's monthly salaries, attended banquets where dishes arrived plated like works of art. Yet that single growl unsettled him more than any corporate scandal ever had. "You're hungry," he said softly, the girl's lips pressed together. She gave the smallest nod, but her voice was firm. "Ethan's hungrier. Ethan," she jerked her chin toward the trees. "My brother. He's 3. He's hiding." A chill ran down Wesley's spine. Not one child, but 2. "May I meet him?" Her eyes narrowed, suspicion flaring again. She studied him the way a seasoned lawyer might examine a hostile witness, searching for the cracks, for the lie, and then, perhaps because her desperation outweighed her fear, she spun on her heel and darted to the tree line. Wesley waited, his pulse drumming in his ears. When she emerged again, his breath caught. A tiny boy clung to her hand, his face pale and gaunt, his dark hair tangled. He carried a threadbare stuffed rabbit pressed to his chest like armor. His eyes were too large for his thin face, ringed with exhaustion, but even through the haze of illness and hunger, Wesley saw the spark of life still clinging there. "Ethan," Harper whispered. "This man says he can help." The little boy didn't answer. He only tightened his grip on the rabbit and half hid behind Harper's dress. Wesley dropped to one knee on the gravel, his expensive suit creasing without a second thought. "Hello, Ethan," he said gently. "My name's Wesley. Would you like something to eat?" The boy's eyes flickered to his sister, Harper's. Shoulders rose and fell with a sigh that seemed far too weary for a 6-year-old. "He'll eat," she said finally, "if you promise we can stay together." That single word promise landed like a weight in Wesley's chest. He had signed contracts worth billions, made promises to boards, investors, and partners all over the world, but never had he felt the gravity of a word like he did now. Kneeling before these children, "I promise," he said, his voice steady. Despite the storm rising inside him, he rose to his feet and extended a hand. Harper hesitated, her small fingers trembling as they hovered near his. When she finally let him hold her hand, it was not a gesture of trust, it was a reluctant gamble. A last card played by a child who had run out of options. Minutes later, in the warmth of a nearby diner, Wesley watched the children devour plates of food as if afraid it might vanish. Ethan's hands shook so badly he nearly dropped his spoon. Harper, though hungry herself, wrapped half her sandwich in a napkin and tucked it carefully into her pocket. For later, for survival. Wesley couldn't look away. He had closed billion-dollar acquisitions without blinking, but these 2 children, eating as though it was the first real meal they'd had in days, unraveled him completely. His throat burned, his eyes stung, and for the first time in years, the grief over Elizabeth felt less like a weight, and more like a chain pulling him toward something unexpected, something alive. When Harper finally looked up, her cheeks flushed. From eating, she caught him staring. "Why are you helping us?" she asked. The question hit harder than he anticipated. Why, indeed? Was it because they were children abandoned by the world? Because Harper's face bore the haunting echo of Elizabeth's? Or because in their presence, for the first time since his wife's death, he didn't feel completely dead inside? He swallowed, his hand curling into a fist on the table. "Because your mother would want me to," he said softly. Harper tilted her head, eyes narrowing with a strange intensity. "But you don't even know my mommy." The word sent a shiver down Wesley's spine. He thought of the grave, of Elizabeth's name carved into marble, of the locket he had once given her, lost years ago. Doubt and dread coiled inside him. Maybe he didn't know. Maybe there was more to Elizabeth's past than he had ever understood. And as Harper's gaze bore into his, filled with equal parts mistrust and hope, Wesley realized he had just stepped onto a path that would change everything he thought he knew about Elizabeth, about himself, and about the family he might still have a chance to protect. The next morning, Wesley was awake before dawn, staring at the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse. He had barely slept, haunted by the faces of Harper and Ethan, the sound of their hunger, the way Harper's tiny hands had tucked food away for later, as though she had long ago accepted scarcity as her companion. For a man whose world revolved around surplus, around more, that single act gnawed at him like a splinter in his chest. By 8, he was already dressed, in casual clothes, denim, and a button-down, far from his usual armor of Italian suits, and riding in the back of his car. The city rolled by outside the tinted windows, but his mind was elsewhere. He rehearsed what he might say to Harper when he saw her again, how he would begin earning her trust, how he would ask about Catherine Brooks, the mother the shelter records had named. He didn't yet know what he was hoping to find, but something deep within him whispered there was more to this story, something Elizabeth had left behind. The West Side Children's Center was a modest building painted in bright primary colors, its chain-link fence enclosing a small playground scattered with toys. When Wesley stepped inside, the director, Ms. Pearson, approached him with a grim expression that made his stomach tighten. "Mr. Reynolds," she said carefully, "I was about to call you." "What is it?" he asked. "It's the children. They're gone." The words crashed into him like a blow. "Gone? What do you mean gone?" "Harper climbed out a window during the night," Ms. Pearson explained. "She helped her brother out. They've done this before, according to their file. They rarely stay anywhere long. They're terrified of being separated." Wesley pressed a hand to his temple. His head was suddenly pounding, his pulse hammering. But they were safe. Here. Why would they? He cut himself off. He knew why. He had seen the way Harper hovered over Ethan, how she read every adult's expression with suspicion. To her, institutions weren't safety. They were threats. Shelters and systems meant foster homes. Foster homes meant separation, and separation was the one thing she feared more than hunger. Ms. Pearson placed a thin file into his hand. "This is everything we have." "It isn't much. Their mother, Catherine Brooks, died 3 months ago. Cause of death, pneumonia. Father unknown, no relatives listed." Wesley flipped the file open with trembling hands. Catherine Brooks, the name burned into his mind. Elizabeth's name was not there, and yet Harper had knelt at Elizabeth's grave. He remembered the locket, the engraving he himself had carved years ago. "To E forever yours. W." Harper had pulled it from beneath her dress, as though it were a holy relic. His breath caught. Could Catherine and Elizabeth have been connected? Sisters, half-sisters, a secret family Elizabeth had never told him about. The thought made his chest ache with both dread and hope. "Do you know where they might go?" he asked. Ms. Pearson hesitated. Harper mentioned a spot near Oakwood Park. A lot of homeless families passed through there. Minutes later, Wesley was back in his car, the thin file clutched in his hand, directing his driver toward the park. He stared out at the streets rushing past. For years, he had lived above this city, watching it from penthouse balconies and boardroom windows, blind to the hidden world just beneath. Now, as the polished towers gave way to boarded-up storefronts and graffiti-scarred walls, he felt like he was descending into an underworld he had never allowed himself to see. Oakwood Park sprawled across the edge of a decaying neighborhood. Its playground equipment was rusting, its benches broken, and the grass overgrown. Here, families with haunted eyes huddled under tarps, children scavenged for scraps, and the air carried the sour tang of smoke and despair. Wesley stepped out of the car, his polished shoes crunching gravel, his presence drawing weary stares. For hours, he walked the park and surrounding streets, showing a discreetly taken photo of Harper and Ethan at the diner to anyone who would. "Look," an elderly man feeding pigeons finally nodded. "I've seen them. The little girl's sharp eyes. Fierce about that brother of hers. They come by sometimes, looking for food." Another lead took him to Marino's, a family-owned restaurant on the corner. The manager frowned at the photo. "Yeah, they come by when we toss out the day-old bread. Girl always asks before she takes it. Polite kid." The words lodged in Wesley's throat. Elizabeth's eyes, Elizabeth's dignity, living in a child who begged for scraps. By late afternoon, exhaustion dragged at him. He sank onto a cracked park bench, watching families gather round picnic tables, their laughter a knife twisting in him. They had certainty, security. Harper and Ethan had nothing. When the sun began to sink, casting long shadows across the park, he tried one last place, a corner store. The owner barely glanced at the photo before nodding. "She was here this morning. Asked if she could sweep up in exchange for milk for her brother." I pointed her toward that building across the street. He gestured toward an abandoned structure, its windows shattered, its brick walls scarred with graffiti. "Second floor. Some squatters use it." Wesley's chest tightened as he stared at the looming building. He could almost hear Elizabeth's voice in his memory, gentle but firm. "If you ever see a child in need, don't walk away, Wesley. Don't ever walk away." He rose, his jaw set. He had faced hostile takeovers, government hearings, and investors ready to tear him apart. But as he stepped toward the darkened building, Wesley knew this finding of fragile children in the shadows was the most important fight of his life. The stairwell smelled of urine and rot. Each creak of the steps echoed like a warning. On the second floor, he paused, hearing hushed voices beyond a partially open door. Just a little bit. Ethan, that's all we have until tomorrow. Harper's voice. Wesley's heart thundered. He raised a hand and knocked gently on the door frame. Harper, Ethan, it's me, Wesley, from the cemetery. The room went silent, then shuffling sounds. The door creaked open an inch and one wary. I peered through the gap. What do you want? Harper's voice was sharp, but beneath it he heard exhaustion, desperation, and the faintest thread of hope. And in that moment, Wesley understood this wasn't just about helping. This was about earning their trust, about fighting for a place in their fragile world before it collapsed completely. The smell of mildew and dust hung heavy in the air. As Wesley steadied his breathing outside the half-open door, his mind told him he had no place here. What did a billionaire CEO know about abandoned buildings, about survival on the streets? But his heart pressed him forward. He could hear Harper shifting on the other side, could almost picture her small body blocking Ethan with that same fierce protectiveness he'd seen at the diner. May I come in? Wesley asked gently, his voice low so it wouldn't carry through the decrepit halls. There was a pause, the kind of silence heavy with calculation. Then Harper's answer came, sharp but trembling. No, we don't trust people. People always want something. Wesley pressed his palm to the cracked wood. I don't want anything, Harper. I just want to help. Ethan sounded sick at the diner. Please, let me see him. The door creaked wider. Harper's face appeared, her eyes shadowed by exhaustion. She didn't speak, but she stepped back enough for him to enter. The sight inside nearly buckled him. The room was bare save for flattened cardboard boxes stacked into a makeshift bed. A few food wrappers littered the corner. The boy lay curled under a threadbare blanket, his rabbit clutched to his chest. His face was flushed, his breathing shallow. Harper knelt beside him, her hand stroking his damp hair, her little jaw set, with a determination that should have belonged to an adult, not a child. Wesley crouched down. How long has he been like this? Harper's shoulders stiffened. He'll get better. He just needs rest. No, Wesley said softly but firmly, reaching to touch Ethan's forehead. The heat burned his palm. He has a fever. He needs medicine, a doctor. We can't pay for a doctor. Harper's voice cracked as she said it, and she looked away quickly, ashamed of the truth. You don't have to. I can cover it. Her eyes snapped back to his, suspicious, piercing. Why? Why would a rich man like you care about us? That single word rich cut deeper than he expected. He realized in her eyes, he was no different than the people who had turned her away, who measured worth in dollars and not in dignity. He steadied himself, met her gaze, and answered with the truth. Because I see you, because no child should be alone in a place like this, and because you remind me of someone I loved. For a long moment, Harper said nothing. Then her lips trembled. If we go with you, can I stay with Ethan? No one can take him away. I promise, Wesley said, and this time it wasn't a business promise, not a line in a contract. It was a vow carved from the deepest part of him. She studied him, searching for the last she expected to find. But instead of words, he offered his actions. He slid his arms beneath Ethan, lifting him as gently as if the boy were glass. Ethan stirred, whimpered, then settled against his chest. Harper hovered close, gripping her backpack strapped with white. Knuckles torn between fear and relief, they descended the stairs together, Harper flinching at every groan of the rotting steps, her eyes darting as though someone might appear to rip her brother away. When they stepped outside, the fading sunlight painted the sky in bruised purples and reds. Wesley's black town car idled at the curb, its polished surface so out of place against the cracked sidewalks. Harper hesitated. That's your car? Yes. It looks like a house on wheels. Wesley almost smiled, but the weight of Ethan in his arms reminded him this was no time for humor. He opened the door and slid inside, cradling the boy. Harper climbed in reluctantly, still poised to bolt if anything seemed wrong. The drive through the city was silent, but charged. Streetlights flickered across Harper's wary eyes. Ethan's head shifted against Wesley's chest, his breathing ragged. Wesley's mind churned. What would he do if the boy's fever spiked tonight? How could he explain to Harper that her mother's death didn't have to mean the end of her safety? When the car pulled up to the gleaming glass tower that housed his penthouse, Harper's jaw dropped. The marble lobby gleamed, the doorman stood at attention, and the air smelled of polished wood and fresh flowers. "You live here," she whispered, "for now." Wesley admitted. He suddenly saw the building not through the eyes of his wealthy peers, but through Harper's, cold, massive, far and upstairs. The elevator doors slid open into the penthouse. The vast space stretched before them, polished floors, expensive art, walls of glass, but to Wesley, for the first time in 5 years, it looked lifeless, soulless. Harper's small voice echoed in the cavernous silence. "It's too big. Nobody needs this much space." Wesley couldn't argue. He only glanced down at Ethan, pale and shivering in his arms, and whispered, "Maybe it's been waiting for you." That night, Dr. Morris, his private physician, arrived, his bag in hand and brows raised at the unusual sight of his powerful patient pacing like a restless father. He examined Ethan, scribbled prescriptions, and delivered his verdict: pneumonia. Early stages, he'll need antibiotics, rest, and proper food, but with care, he'll recover. Care. The word struck Wesley like a bell. For years, he had poured his energy into profits, projects, acquisitions. Yet here was the truest investment of all. 2 children who had no one, dropped into his life like ghosts of Elizabeth's unspoken wishes. As Harper tucked the blanket around her brother, later that night, she whispered, "If you break your promise, I'll never forgive you." Wesley, watching from the doorway, answered without hesitation, "I won't. Not now. Not ever." And as the city lights flickered outside, Wesley Reynolds realized this was only the beginning, that somewhere, hidden beneath grief and secrets, Elizabeth had left him a path, and it began with Harper's eyes staring back at him in the dim glow, full of questions he would have to answer, no matter the cost. Wesley had spent his entire adult life believing boardrooms were battlegrounds, that the fiercest wars were fought with contracts, acquisitions, and hostile takeovers. But that evening, as he stood in the doorway of his own dining room, he realized he had been wrong. The real war was happening here between hunger and nourishment, trust and suspicion. A grieving man and a fragile children trying to survive in a world that had discarded them. The long mahogany table, polished to a shine, stretched out like something prepared for royalty. Martha, his housekeeper, had insisted on setting it with fine china, crystal glasses, and silverware that gleamed beneath the chandelier. To Wesley, it suddenly felt ridiculous, even cruel, to expect 2 children who had eaten scraps off the ground to sit in a room that looked more like a museum than a home. But before he could stop her, Harper's small voice cut through the tension. "Why do we need all this?" she asked, eyeing the place settings as though they were part of some trick. Her chin jutted upward, stubborn and cautious. "Food is food. You don't need gold plates to eat it." Wesley felt a jolt. Elizabeth had once said almost the exact words to him during their first years of marriage. When he had insisted on expensive dinners to impress her, "Food tastes the same on a paper plate, Wes," she teased, laughing as she passed him a sandwich. That memory now twisted into the present moment, Elizabeth's voice echoing from the lips of a child who wasn't hers yet somehow was. "You're right," Wesley admitted softly, surprising even himself. He reached forward and slid the silverware aside, replacing it with a simple spoon and fork. "We'll keep it simple." Harper's suspicious gaze lingered on him, as though she were trying to decide if this was a trap. Then, slowly, she guided Ethan onto a chair beside her. The boy's small body wavered with exhaustion, but the smell of food coaxed him upright. Martha brought out bowls of chicken soup, steam curling upward. Ethan dipped his spoon clumsily, spilling more than he ate, but Harper leaned over, gently guiding his hand, murmuring encouragement. Wesley sat across from them, watching with an intensity that unsettled even him. The sound of a child's spoon scraping against a bowl, the muffled giggle as Ethan slurped loudly, these were ordinary noises. But in Wesley's dining room, they became extraordinary. For 5 years, silence had reigned here. Now it was broken by life as they ate. Wesley's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced down, 3 missed calls from Robert, his assistant, and a flood of urgent texts from board members. He should have been preparing for tomorrow's quarterly review, one of the most important of the year. Instead, he pressed the phone face down on the table and let it buzz unheard. Harper noticed. Her spoon hovered in midair. "Why don't you?" "Answer." "Because right now," Wesley said slowly, "this is more important." Her eyes widened slightly, confusion flickering across her face, as if no adult had ever chosen her over anything else. It was Ethan, however, who shifted the night into something more haunting. After he had eaten, he grew drowsy, his head lolling against Harper's shoulder. Harper reached beneath her dress, fingers curling around a thin chain. She tugged out a tarnished silver locket, its surface worn with age. "My mom gave me this," she said, her voice so soft it almost broke. She said it came from someone really special, that as long as I wore it, I'd never be alone. The world seemed to tilt under Wesley's feet. His breath caught. He knew that locket. He had bought it himself 15 years ago, on their 5th anniversary. He had it engraved in his own hand. "To E forever yours." W. Elizabeth had worn it daily until one day, during their separation, she had claimed it was lost. "May I see that?" His voice cracked against the weight of memory. Harper hesitated, clutching it protectively. Her eyes narrowed again. "Why? You don't take things that don't belong to you. That's what bad people do." Wesley's throat closed. Carefully, he reached across the table, his hand open, his palm up. "I won't take it. I need to look." After a moment that stretched like an eternity, Harper slid the locket across the table. Wesley's fingers trembled as he opened the clasp. There it was, the engraving, his Elizabeth's locket. He stared at it until the letters blurred. Where did your mother get this?" he whispered. Harper frowned, confused. "I told you. My mommy gave it to me, Catherine Brooks. She said it was hers, but she never said where it came from. She just told me to keep it safe." The room tilted again. Catherine Brooks, not Elizabeth. Yet here was Elizabeth's locket in the hands of Catherine's daughter. His pulse thundered in his ears. If Catherine had owned this, then somehow, someway, she was connected to Elizabeth. Sisters, cousins, a secret Elizabeth had taken to her grave. The possibilities roared in his head. Before he could speak, Martha appeared, carrying Ethan in her arms. The boy was clean, dressed in a set of pajamas far too big for him, his damp hair curling around his ears. He looked impossibly small in her embrace. "Bed is ready," Martha said softly. "Blue room. 2 beds, so they could stay together." Harper slid off her chair instantly, eyes flashing. "We can stay together." "Yes," Martha assured, smiling. "No one is taking him from you." Harper's face crumpled, the iron mask slipping for the first time. For a flicker of a moment, Wesley saw the little girl. She really was lonely, frightened, desperate for safety. She nodded quickly and followed Martha down the hall. Wesley remained seated, the locket trembling in his hand. He could still see Elizabeth's smile in his mind, the night he clasped it around her neck. And now it was here, in his home, through a child who looked so achingly like her. His phone buzzed again, vibrating against the polished wood. Robert's name lit the screen. Wesley didn't answer. For the first time in his career, business could wait. Because sitting at that table, holding that locket, he realized this wasn't coincidence. This was a trail Elizabeth had left behind, one he was now destined to follow. And somewhere down that trail lay a truth powerful, enough to upend everything he thought he knew about the woman he had loved, and the 2 children now asleep under his roof. The city was still draped in the pale light of early morning when Wesley woke. For the first time in years, his penthouse wasn't silent. From down the hall came faint sounds, death and small coughs, Harper's soft voice murmuring comfort, Martha moving about in the kitchen. It unsettled him, not in a bad way, but in a way that made his chest ache. His home was alive. He sat in his office with the locket laid on the desk before him, its surface catching the weak sunlight. His hand hovered over it, trembling slightly. He had thought he knew Elizabeth's life as thoroughly as he knew his own company's balance sheets. Yet here it was proof that there had been a chapter of her story he had never read, a secret she had carried into the grave. A knock at the door broke his thoughts. Robert's voice came through the line on the phone first, insistent and clipped. "Sir, the investors are demanding to know why you won't attend today's quarterly review. They're furious." Wesley didn't hesitate. "Tell them I'm on personal leave." "Personal leave?" Robert repeated as though the words were foreign. "Sir, Horizon has never, it has now," Wesley said and ended the call. Minutes later, another knock, this one at the front door. Martha appeared with a wary look. "A woman is here," sir. Says she's a private investigator. Diana Mercer. Wesley. Straighten. Send her in. Diana Mercer stepped into his office. Tall and composed in a charcoal suit, her eyes sharp and assessing. She looked like a woman who could cut through lies with a glance. Wesley rose, handed her the locket, and spoke quietly. I need everything you can find on a woman named Catherine Brooks. She died 3 months ago. She had 2 children, Harper and Ethan, and somehow, his voice faltered, somehow she had this. It belonged to my wife, Elizabeth Reynolds. Diana turned the locket over in her gloved hand, studying the engraving. At your interest, I believe Catherine and Elizabeth were connected. Sisters. Cousins, I don't know. But these children showed up at Elizabeth's grave, carrying this locket. And one of them has Elizabeth's eyes. Diana nodded. Once, professional and unreadable, I'll need access to your late wife's records, any belongings. Old correspondence, photos, there's a storage unit downtown, Wesley admitted. I locked away everything after she died. Couldn't face it. His voice cracked, but he pushed on. You'll have complete access. Diana slipped the locket into a small evidence bag. I'll start immediately. Expect me in 2 days with preliminary findings. When she left, the office felt colder. Wesley exhaled and pressed his palms against the desk. He had just placed his heart Elizabeth's memory into the hands of a stranger, but it was the only way forward. He didn't realize Harper was in the hallway until he turned. She stood in the shadows, arms folded tightly, her eyes narrowed. Who was that lady? She demanded. Wesley crouched slightly, softening his voice. She's someone who helps people find answers about us. Harper's voice shook, though her chin lifted with stubborn defiance. Are you sending us away? The question speared through him. No, never. Then why did she ask about my mommy? I heard you. Her small voice quivered, and for the first time, Wesley saw the fractured lines in her armor. She wasn't just suspicious, she was terrified. He took a slow step forward, stopping just short of her reach. Harper, I'm trying to understand something important. About your mother, about my wife. I think they knew each other. Her eyes narrowed, distrust battling with curiosity. Why does it matter? Because it mattered more than he dared admit. Because Elizabeth's ghost was tangled in this, and the children carried threads he couldn't yet see. But he couldn't say that, not to a 6-year-old, because knowing the truth will help me keep my promise to you, he said softly. Harper hesitated. Her lower lip trembled. Then she pressed it flat. People always break promises, she whispered. Not me, Wesley said firmly, holding her gaze. Not this time. Her eyes searched his face with unsettling intensity, as though she could read the truth in the lines of his skin. At last, she gave a small, reluctant nod. Okay, but only if Ethan stays with me. Always. You have my word, Wesley said. That night, when the children were asleep, Wesley couldn't shake the unease. He wandered to the blue room, standing in the doorway. Ethan's small body rose and fell beneath the blanket, clutching his rabbit. Harper was awake, her eyes open in the dim glow of the nightlight, watching him like a sentry. You can sleep, Harper, he murmured. I don't sleep much, she whispered back. Gotta make sure nobody takes him. Wesley's throat tightened. He wanted to tell her she didn't have to live like that anymore, that she could rest. But he knew words weren't enough. Trust wasn't given, it was proven. As he turned away, Harper's small voice stopped him. If you lie, oh no. Wesley froze, his heart hammering. I won't. He closed the door softly, but her words lingered like a vow carved into stone. He knew now, if he failed, if he broke her trust, it wouldn't just be 2 children he lost. It would be Elizabeth all over again, and somewhere out there, in the tangle of past secrets and buried connections, the truth was waiting, a truth that could either destroy him or save them all. The city was restless under a slate-gray sky. 2 days later, when Diana Mercer returned, Wesley had been pacing his office since dawn, his nerves pulled tighter with every tick of the clock. The children were down the hall, Ethan still weak but recovering, Harper keeping constant vigil like a soldier at his side. Every time Wesley passed the blue room, he caught her eyes following him, unblinking, as if daring him to prove himself. When Diana finally arrived, her sharp heels clicking across the marble floor, Wesley felt his throat go dry. She carried a slim leather folder under her arm and a heavier box in her hand. You told me to be thorough, she said without preamble. I was. Wesley gestured her inside, his heart drumming against his ribs. Tell me. She set the box on his desk, then opened the folder. Catherine Brooks was born Catherine Reynolds. The air left Wesley's lungs. Reynolds? Diana nodded. Half-sister to Elizabeth. They shared a father, different mothers. The man abandoned Catherine and her mother when Catherine was a toddler. Elizabeth never told you because Catherine resented the Reynolds name resented. The wealth and privilege Elizabeth inherited while she and her mother lived in near poverty. Catherine took her mother's surname, Brooks, and cut ties. Wesley staggered back a step. His Elizabeth, his Liz had carried that secret all their years of marriage. During your brief separation, Diana continued, Elizabeth reconnected with Catherine. Bank records show she sent money, quietly, for years. Enough to keep Catherine afloat, but never enough to pull her fully out of struggle perhaps because Catherine refused charity. There are letters. She slid several envelopes. Forward. Elizabeth wrote them, but never mailed them. They were found in the storage unit with her belongings. Wesley's hand shook as he lifted one. The handwriting was unmistakable Elizabeth's graceful curves. He read aloud, his voice faltering, Dearest Catherine, I wish I could bridge the gap between us. I wish I could tell Wesley, but you begged me not to. You wanted him to see you for who you were, not who your father had abandoned. If anything ever happens to me, I need you to promise me one thing. Take the locket, give it to your daughter, and tell her if she's ever lost, she will always find safety at my grave, because Wesley will find her there. He's the kind of man who will never walk away from a child in need. The words blurred as tears stung Wesley's eyes. His knees nearly buckled under the weight of the truth. Elizabeth had trusted him across the divide of death itself. She had left him a charge, a promise buried in silence, waiting to be unearthed by fate. Diana closed the folder gently. Catherine tried, but when she fell ill, she made Harper promise to remember Elizabeth's grave. That's why the children went there. They weren't mistaken, Mr. Reynolds. They were following their mother's last instructions. The room spun around him. He saw it all now, the wilted flowers, Harper's trembling voice begging her mommy for food, the uncanny echo of Elizabeth in her eyes. It wasn't coincidence. It was destiny. Why would she keep this from me? Wesley whispered hoarsely. Love, Diana answered simply. Catherine's pride, Elizabeth's loyalty. They were protecting each other, and now, by extension, they passed that protection to you. The folder and box sat on the desk like a verdict. Wesley dismissed Diana with a trembling thank you, then stood in silence, staring out over the city he had ruled with steel and precision. For once, none of it mattered. Behind him, a small voice broke the quiet. What did she say? Wesley turned. Harper stood in the doorway, her fists clenched, her eyes wide. He hadn't heard her enter. She looked so small, but there was steel in her spine. What did that lady tell you about my mom? He knelt, the letter still clutched in his hand. She told me the truth, that your mother, Catherine, was my wife's sister, which makes Elizabeth your aunt. Harper blinked, her mouth falling open. So, that grave, she wasn't your mommy, Wesley said gently, but she loved you all the same. She wanted you safe, and she trusted me to make sure you would be. Harper's face crumpled. For weeks she had carried the belief that Elizabeth was watching over her directly, that the grave was her mother's resting place. To learn it was her aunt, that her real mother had died alone, hit her like a storm. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Silent but unstoppable, Wesley reached for her. But Harper jerked back. Why didn't anyone tell us? She demanded, her voice cracking. Why didn't anyone help? Because secrets and pride got in the way, Wesley admitted, his own voice thick. But I promise you, Harper, I will not let pride or secrets hurt you and Ethan ever again. Her eyes searched his face for the lie she always expected to find, but when she saw none, she stepped forward at last and collapsed into his arms. Her sobs shook his chest as his own tears fell into her hair. For the first time in 5 years, Wesley felt Elizabeth with him, not in grief, but in purpose. Her absence had carved a hole in him, but through these children, through this hidden family, she had left him a path toward healing. He pressed the letter to his heart, whispered into the stillness, I'll keep your promise, Liz, I'll keep them safe. And as Harper clung to him and Ethan stirred in the next room, Wesley Reynolds, billionaire CEO, widower, man of power, finally became what Elizabeth had always believed he could be, a father.